Hi everyone, I'm Sam Mallow. Welcome to Paranormal Yakker. My guest in today's show is Tyrone Ellington. I'll be talking with him about his book, Journey Through the Origins of History, exploring the mysteries of humanity's earliest civilizations. Tyrone Ellington, welcome to Paranormal Yakker.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate that.
Your fascination with ancient civilizations and exploring the mysteries of humanity began at an early age. In fact, you were just 10 years old when you became curious about, started to question, and wanted to learn more about those subjects. What, Tyrone, ignited that interest?
Religion, basically, I grew up in the Catholic Church, and my mom told me when I was young that my grandma wanted me to be baptized when I was young. And that, as I got older and learned about that, it struck a curiosity in me about who is this God, what is God, and where did they come from. And then later on in life, as life continued, I learned about UFOs and extraterrestrials and stuff like that, and I learned the meanings of what those words were. And that struck my curiosity of whether God could be an extraterrestrial, something residing outside of Earth's atmosphere. Then I got older and I started reading the ancient texts, and then I started learning more about civilizations and the idea of where everybody came from, who created us, their mythologies and traditional oral stories that they passed along through their cultures and civilizations. And that kind of just sparked an interest in me in wanting to know. And because a lot of people were telling me things on what I should believe and what I needed to believe versus what the facts were, it made me dig deeper into what was really actually presented to us through the ancient cultures and civilization.
While you've researched and written about many ancient civilizations, including that of the Egyptians, Romans, and Greeks, your favorite is the Sumerians. Why is that?
Well, because that's where you get the first writing system from, or at least that's what modern academia says. They said the Sumerians are considered the first civilization because of their writing system that started around 3200 BC. I actually took a class from Bar Ilan University from Dr. Nili Samet, and she says in that class that the writing system started around 3200 BC, and it was because of a pictographic script. Now, for me, that personally, that's where we get where it went from traditional oral stories to a type of a recording system where you don't have to translate the information orally anymore. You can read it. And I say that because not everybody has the ability to hear, right? We have ailments in humans where some people are blind, some people can't hear or speak. So for people who are deaf in the ears, they have the ability, if they can read in a certain way, they can possibly get a better understanding of what the traditional oral stories were saying. Now, it takes time and effort. Sign language, for instance, sign language is a great example of that. And Braille is a good example of that also. That I wanted to just understand how everybody got the information and how the information may have changed from one time to another.
You, Tyrone, have found similarities in ancient religions and belief systems from people who lived far from each other and, in fact, never communicated with each other. What are those similarities?
Basically religion, believing in something other than ourselves that's more powerful, i.e., gods or goddesses. Afterlife. Everybody wants to know what happens after we pass away, right? That's a big thing. We all want to live forever in a sense of some ideas, but what is it actually after our life? After is there life basically after death? And you have similarities where drawings and pictographic script that goes back to just the simple cross. The cross doesn't mean what it means today, what it meant thousands of years ago. The cross just makes basically meant X marks the spot, but now it's the representation of a monotheistic religion from any of the monotheistic religions that we fall under from the Abrahamic faith.
How far back in the history of our planet can us humans trace our ancestral roots? And is it known where and when we first appeared, and at what point did we begin walking on two legs?
That's a good question. I talk about the Australopithecus ramidus and Australopithecus afarensis, and that's there's the idea that humans are humans because of our bipedalism, walking on our two legs. That's what makes us human, for some people at least, and that goes back millions of years ago. But a lot of people, when I bring that up, they bring up the argument where chickens walk on their two legs, or kangaroos, which makes a perfect sense, and that's why other people that I've learned from, that the soul or the mind is what makes us human. So there's a whole different idea of what makes us human. And in my book, I actually talk about anatomically human: the shoulder, or the arms, legs, shoulders, torso, feet, hands, and head. When we look at a human, what is considered a human? You have a great picture of an alien behind you. Anatomically, that looks like a human, right? It just doesn't have the same features that we have, as far as the eyes, the mouth, nose, but we don't actually know what they look like. We don't even know what the Homo erectus actually looks like, based off of actual pictures. We just have an idea because of their skulls, their arms, their legs. We don't have a full-fledged Homo erectus with skin, hair, the eyeballs, and all that other stuff. So I wanted to know the human side, what makes us human. And because we have so many theories about Homo erectus, Neanderthals, Australopithecus ramidus, and Ramidus and afarensis, it's just basically bipedalism is what probably started it. And they say that goes back millions of years ago. But I've also read in books from so many different individuals that 65 million years ago, they found footprints in stones. And there's a whole idea of how that could have happened, but the idea is that they actually have not just ideas, but artifacts that shows human footprint from 65 million years ago. And if you think about that, that's around the same time the dinosaurs were around the earth. I mean, you got them going back hundreds of millions of years ago, but were humans around at the same time as dinosaurs? If that's true with the footprints, even with basic artifacts of arrowheads, some people would call them arrowheads or flints.
If you'd ask most people how they would refer to our species, they'd undoubtedly say Homo sapiens. However, I'm fairly certain you won't hear too many of them talking about Homo sapiens sapiens. You do. What, Tyrone, is the difference between Homo sapiens and Homo sapiens sapiens?
That's a good question, and I'm still trying to figure that out, because they say that the oldest Homo sapiens bones that they found is in Morocco, Africa, that goes back 300,000 years ago. That's from a new article. Well, not new as a sense of just this time frame, but 2012 is when they came out with that peer-reviewed article. But then they say 200,000 years from the bones that they found in Ethiopia. But they also say we are not the same Homo sapiens sapiens as they were 200,000 years ago, and definitely not of as 300,000 years ago. 300,000 years ago, they said that their heads were more elongated, and then 200,000 years ago, they have a different bone structure. So there's really not a good answer for that, and I'm still trying to figure that out. I just know that distinguishing from Homo sapiens and Homo sapiens sapiens, the extra sapiens part is what they consider the more modern intellectual individuals, where we had more of a more intelligence than before. But our intelligence is always evolving and getting better. We're not the same people from the 1900s. And when I say the same people, we don't have the same knowledge that the people in 1900s have. So it's that's something that is very interesting to me, because it's going to make me wonder, will they add a third sapiens part to it? Will it be Homo sapiens sapiens sapiens? Because when we start traveling in space, our intelligence, of course, is going to be much greater than what we have right here now in 2025. And because space can change our body features, will our bodies change because of that? And will the extra sapiens distinguish that?
The Anunnaki are a group of deities that were part of the belief system of the ancient Sumerians, Akkadians, Assyrians, and Babylonians. Author Zecharia Sitchin claimed they were extraterrestrials from a far distant planet called Nibiru. You say the Anunnaki may have emerged from the sea. What are your reasons for saying that?
Because I came through a lot of texts. First, it started with Zecharia Sitchin and his idea. He always talked about the depictions of the Anunnaki. Enki was a sea god. Enlil was a wind god, and there's different gods that follow or have characteristics of what could be known as on planet Earth. When you read the text, even Zecharia Sitchin in so many ways says that Enki came from the water. He doesn't say the depths of the seas, but he does say that they came from the water. So when his idea is that they came from planet Nibiru, and just like how astronauts today, when they come in space, sometimes their capsule goes into the water and they have to send ships out to get them. That's how I get the idea that he's describing that they came from the water. But when you read the actual text, it says depths of the seas, and there's cuneiform tablets out there that said these guys came from the water, which Zecharia Sitchin does say, but there's no cuneiform tablet that says they came from a planet Nibiru that orbits our sun every 3,600 years. There's absolutely zero on that aspect of where they came from, but there is text in there that says they came from the waters or the depths of the seas. And you can tell by, because Enki is our creator, which is actually in the cuneiform text, Enki being our creator, he's a water god, and you can see streams coming from his shoulders, and he's known as the God that come from the water, basically, and brought knowledge to humans. So there's absolutely uh, evidence that says they came from the waters. It's just where in the waters that they come from. From an island or some sort? Was it in the depths of the seas, as far as underneath the water? But I also have to give credit to the idea that a lot of people have the seas was not just the water. The seas could have been the universe itself, because there is water in space. We know that there is water in space in so many different ways. That's why when comets and stuff like that pass by, sometimes their tails is frozen with some type of water and stuff like that. And there's people talk about this on the academia side in peer reviewed articles. But when I read the text for myself, there is no text that says they came from a planet Nibiru. Matter of fact, the Sumerians only knew of only 5 planets, and that was because of the naked eye, what they could see with their naked eye. And this comes from Samuel Noah Kramer, who actually translate the text. It wasn't until much later on, when they needed to make, when they started making um, the festivals and rituals, where people started getting the ideas of Planet Nibiru. I've read that the Babylonians have actually said that Jupiter was considered Nibiru at some time. And that's interesting to me, because when you read the text for yourself and read the translations and the transliterations, this whole idea that the Sumerians said one thing. It's not the Sumerians said something. The Akkadians said something. The Assyrians said something. The Hittites said something. The Chaldeans said something. The Babylonians said something. And then that's the idea of where these individuals came from. And I can tell you personally, I have not yet come to anything, and nobody has came to any cuneiform tablet that says the Anunnaki came from planet Nibiru. Matter of fact, the Sumerians didn't even call them the Anunnaki; they called them the Anuna. So that's a whole different change on that aspect, also.
In your book, Tyrone, you credit a number of astronomers for contributing to our understanding of the cosmos. Which ones would you put in the top tier of that list?
I have to say Georgie Lemaitre. That's actually in the first chapter of my book. I talk about Georgie Lemaitre and Fred Hoyle. Georgie Lemaitre was basically an individual who came up with the Big Bang Theory, but a lot of people don't know is that he didn't use the term Big Bang. It was actually Fred Hoyle who used the term Big Bang to basically discredit Georgie Lemaitre's primeval atom theory, basically the explosion of the universe and what it came to be as today. So and that's me going back to the origins of who was the individual who started this idea of what people consider the Big Bang Theory. And we get, like I said, we get the Big Bang Theory, though those words specifically from Fred Hoyle, because he wanted to discredit Georgie Lemaitre's ideas. At one time, Albert Einstein actually didn't agree with George Lemaitre, and it wasn't until later on in his mathematical equations when he started to agree with him. So those are the top guys that I would put on there, and the reason why is because that's where we get the whole argument about Big Bang.
I have to thank you for something in that what you just said is a perfect segue to my next question to you, as you will see, because it's interconnected. Theories abound about our origins, how we came to be, who or what created us, and they vary greatly from the writings in the Bible's book of Genesis and the similar scenario written in the Quran to the Big Bang theory. Which theory, Tyrone, do you buy into most, or is the answer to that still to be determined?
When it comes to the Big Bang Theory, I wanted the best description of how the universe was created from the ancient civilization side comes from the Babylonians. It's in their Enuma Elish, the seven creation tablets. And it's called different things, of course, but it's basically the Enuma Elish. And that's where you get the creation of the universe, creation of the gods, creation of human. But that's a more detailed description than what's actually written in the Bible. It says in the Bible, God created heaven and earth, and it gives the days that He created certain things. And we know that God created the heavens and the earth in 6 days, and then the seventh day He rested. Well, the Enuma Elish is called the seven tablets of creation, or different titles for that, depending on who you go off of. But the Enuma Elish is basically an in-depth description of all that. You might read just a couple of paragraphs in the Bible about it, but then Numa Elish, you're going to get you a whole scenario that goes into it.
One of the chapters in Journey Through the Origins of History features select revised articles from your website. Can you give me the titles of some of those articles as well as provide a brief synopsis of their content?
Yeah, a good example is the creation of time that's on my website, rebirthoftheword.com. I wrote these articles. I started my website about 5 years ago, and it was because I wanted to basically share everything that I've personally read and basically have an outlet for the information that I've learned. It's not saying that I'm right or wrong. It's basically my journal, my diary. You can say as what I've learned. I learned something. I did a quick article on it, put in there what I've known, and I know what books that I've read, and I know where I can get my sources for all this stuff. So I took those, but I also have more information. And because I created my website for the simple fact that I wanted to make sure that I had something that I can go to for more information. I know that my website is not always going to be there. There's going to be a time when I pass away and my website is not going to be maintenance, it's not going to be up to date. Nobody's going to be able to pay for it and stuff like that. So I wanted to take what I wrote in my articles that I felt like that was very important and put it in my book so that way it can always be there. And then it was mainly for so people can get an idea of why I wrote what I wrote in my book, basically, right? Like the creation of time. I talk about the creation of time and how it came to, and I talked about George Lemaitre and Fred Hoyle. But in the book, I also wanted to talk about Ptolemy's book Almagest, where he talked, where there's, basically a whole idea these asteroids and the constellations and how the sun and the moon and stuff like that moves. I didn't talk about that in my article, but because I gained further information, I wanted to add that into that section.
Should viewers of Paranormal Yakker want to buy Journey Through the Origins of History, exploring the mysteries of humanity's earliest civilizations, and also check out your website, how, Tyrone, can they do that?
On my website, there's everything that I have, from my YouTube to my X account, my Facebook, my Rumble account that I just created, and even a link to where you can buy my book from Amazon. But if you also want a signed copy, you can go through on there and message me and say, hey, I would like a signed copy of your book. And the reason why I did that is because there's a lot of places that I share my information at. When I first started this, I didn't know that I didn't know that there was so many things where people will go to for different information. Some people have Facebook but don't have Twitter X. Some people go to Reddit and don't use any of the other social media platforms. So I try to reach out to everybody that was serious about this information. And my website literally gives all those. And I have on my YouTube channel, my Rumble, I have a Spotify, and all that is linked onto my website. So that way, if you miss something here, you can find something there. It's rebirthoftheword.com.
Tyrone Ellington, I thank you for being my guest on Paranormal Yakker. It's been great yakking with you. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Hi, everyone. This is Stan Mallon of Paranormal Yakker. I hope you enjoyed the interview you just watched. So that you don't miss any upcoming shows, be sure to subscribe to my free YouTube channel. To do that, just press the subscribe button on your screen.